Speaker.
John O'Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, can I say it is exciting to be associated with a government that is getting on and getting things done. I found it kind of interesting to hear from the last speaker from the opposite benches who decided she would try to accuse us of dropping the ball, and yet at the last election ours was not the party that dropped a seat. In fact, ours was a party that actually grew. And why did we grow? Well, we grew in terms of the majority that we had because New Zealanders liked what they saw over the last 6 years. They liked what this government was doing and they wanted more of it. They saw that there was something that they could be confident in, and so they returned this national government to the Treasury benches. And why did they do it? Well, I can tell you that the people I speak to on the streets every day in Palmerston North have told me that it's because they have got confidence in this government. They've got confidence in this Prime Minister and in the Minister of Finance. They've proved themselves worthy of the trust of the people of New Zealand because they are getting things moving and New Zealand is improving. But our work here is not finished. There is more for us to do. And while we're not making mainland cheese, good things do take some time, and so we will continue to work hard to continue to progress to ensure that New Zealand is moving forward. There's been calls from the opposite side of as we've been talking about social housing, that we should simply leave it alone. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you a story from my experiences in Palmerston North to explain just exactly why we should not leave social housing alone. Last year, while campaigning throughout the campaign, I was speaking to somebody down at the markets, at the Albert Street Market, in fact, who told me that she was a Housing New Zealand tenant and had been in her house for about 30 years. I thought, well, that's good. She clearly needed our assistance of the New Zealand people to be able to remain in that house. She said that she was income tested and so she only had to pay $80 a week for her house, and I thought, well, if that's her situation and what she can afford, then perhaps that's appropriate, that's what she pays. She told me that her children had left home and that she was now living in her 4-bedroom house. But don't worry, Mr. Speaker, those rooms were not going to waste, because those rooms were being occupied by overseas students who were paying board to this person, and it was all above board, to be honest, because if you have 2 boarders, you don't have to declare the income. In fact, you could argue that it was very entrepreneurial on her part. But actually, as I was talking to her, I couldn't help but think of the stories that we're all told and we hear about and that we've come across of families with 3 or more children who are perhaps living in overcrowded conditions because there isn't enough housing for them or the appropriate housing for them to occupy. And I thought perhaps they would make better use of that house than perhaps international students and lining the pockets of somebody who was, to be fair, making a profit on the back of hard-working New Zealanders who were paying taxes, who perhaps were more deserving of that house. And while I'm not saying that we should just simply evict people from those houses, we do need to engage more with them and to ensure that we are monitoring and we are looking and ensuring that the resources that we have for our social housing in New Zealand are actually being used in the most appropriate way. Yesterday, we had the Housing New Zealand come to the Social Services Select Committee to talk about the year in review. It's very clear that we have got greater demand in certain types and certain places around New Zealand for housing and less in others. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is time something was done to rectify that. And so that is what we are doing. That is what our Minister of Social Housing is doing, and she's outlined her plans to do that. She's outlined that we are not simply going to put people in houses and leave them alone for 30 years. We're going to look for new ways to do this. We are going to engage with community organisations who perhaps might, for this person, have maybe moved them on to a point where they didn't need social housing anymore. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. We're going to support more New Zealanders into housing that meets their needs. We're going to ensure that they can start to move towards independence. We're going to increase the number of affordable housing supply, particularly in Auckland. We've got a plan, we're working towards it, and Mr. Speaker, New Zealand will be the better for another 3 years of this national government.